I will speak in English, and those of you who need translation, please put earphones. And I would like to start with a moment of reflection. So I would like to invite you to reflect on your own experience when you have felt that you are growing, that you kind of suddenly realized that there was a moment when you matured. So just think about this moment. And when you think about it, so think also, has this moment of your growing been connected with any experience of hardship, of something like difficulty and hardship? And if it was, please raise your hands. Thank you very much. So, as you can see from my title, yes, I'm going to talk about camps, and not kind of camps that Father Stephen was talking about, quite different camps. And I would like to start with one quotation of from a book which I'm going to mention about. So it's a book from by Tamara Milutina, born Bezhanitskaya, Lagovskaya, from her first marriage. And she wrote this in her memoirs. I felt like an adult at the age of 30. And suddenly, on the night of 10th of July of 1941, when I was lying on the top bank of a freight car squeezed by fear, the train was somewhere on the spare tracks of the Tallinn railways. So Tamara was arrested by the NKVD in Tartu in June 1941, following the arrest of her first husband, Ivan Lagovsky, who was the secretary of the Russian Student Christian Movement. Christina Kivel yesterday spoke about Vasily Zinkovsky, who was the organizer of this movement, and Lagovsky was a secretary. Having been deported to Siberian Gulag with thousands of Estonians and some Russians who lived in Estonia, she served 5 years in the Gulag and returned to Estonia in 1946, only to be arrested again in 1949 and deported to Krasnoyarsk Krai, where she lived until 1955, married another inmate, had 2 children, and then returned to Estonia. And in her second imprisonment, she was followed by her 60-year-old mother, Klavdia Bezhanitskaya, one of the first women doctors graduating from Tartu University. And this is what she writes later in the same book, reflecting on her experience of deportation. All my school years were joyful, easy and joyful. Learning wasn't difficult for me. My mother surrounded me with love and care. Everyone was kind to me. Not for my sake, but for hers. For everyone, I was the daughter of Dr. Bezhanitskaya. And in 1930, at the age of 19, I was married an intelligent, kind, and respected man. On the day of the wedding, I left for Paris. And for all my new acquaintances, I was the wife of Ivan Arkadievich Lagovsky. And again, everyone, for my husband's sake, was kind and attentive to me. And now, I was nobody. I felt like a snail whose shell had been torn off. Do I have it in Russian? Oh, no. So, Tsvetan Todorov wrote that 20th century will be remembered in history by the invention of the concentration camp, but by which he meant both the Nazi camps and the Soviet Gulag. both epitomized extreme circumstances and extreme dehumanization. We have thousands of accounts of the Gulag survivors and the concentration camp survivors. And as Bruno Bettelheim, another camp survivor, pointed out, the camp can teach us about the human condition, but can it teach us something about maturity? What do we learn from just a few stories compared to millions of stories untold by people who perished in the Gulag and who couldn't tell their story? And why do we need to learn about these stories? One reason to do that is that the story repeats itself. So we have political prisoners in Russia, okay, not 7 million, but still, and in Belarus. And the conditions, of course, are different, yes. Not like in Stalin's Gulag, but still, prisoners today, they are subjects of humiliation, of we know tortures and injustice, detrimental conditions to their health, etc. So, but let's go back to the Stalin's Gulag. What about this situation in which people found themselves? So, what kind of maturity, growth could happen in these moments when people had no control of their life? If we speak about maturity as the way to make choices, what kind of choices could these people make when they were victims? They were not there on their own will. Many of them were not even tried for any crimes, so they were innocent. So the human ability to remain human was tested to the extreme. Viktor Frankl wrote, okay, it's not here. It's in the beginning. While we were waiting for the shower, our nakedness was brought home to us. We really had nothing now except our bare bodies, even minus hair. All we possessed literally was our naked existence. What else remained for us as a material link with our former lives? And this sense of being naked, being alone, being torn of any social connections is probably what Tamara Milutina called being a snail without a shell. And people who experienced this, they found it very difficult to be to have any illusions. And we have these quotations from two survivors of Nazi camps who committed suicide, the Polish survivor Borowski, Tadeusz Borowski, I think, and Prima Levi. So you can read it. So morality was like a rotten rug, says Borowski, and Prima Levi speaks about struggle to survive. So did all previous things that one learned in their life before prison matter? Virtues, morality, all that was left was struggle to survive. And some theologians today, they speak not only about God after Holocaust, they speak about God after Gulag, that there is this sense of God-forsakenness, as Renas mentioned today, and this, there is a kind of a different theological understanding of what happens to a human person, to the image of God in a human person in the Gulag. And a colleague of mine called Katya Tolstaya from Amsterdam, so she is writing a book about God after the Gulag, where she says in the conditions of extreme dehumanization, one cannot really expect a person to retain the image of God. And I disagree with that, and I think that what we need to see is that precisely at these moments of realizing one's nakedness, something changes in a person irreversibly. Todorov writes, an experience like the prison camps forces some people to mature more rapidly than they might have done otherwise. teaching them lessons they wouldn't have learned on the outside. For some people, this growth meant a kind of spiritual conversion, and this is what Solzhenitsyn reflects upon. He even says that he might have been a worse person if he had escaped imprisonment. And yet, we know there were stories of people who staged rebellion, resisted the guards, gave their life for the prisoners, like Maximilian Kolbe, who was canonized by the Catholic Church, or reportedly Mother Maria Skoptsova, who was canonized as a saint by the Orthodox Church. The majority of people in the camp were neither saints nor heroes, and that's why they're close to us. So when we look at them, when we read their life writing, autobiographies, so we learn something about ourselves. And I think that's why I choose Tamara Milutina to talk about this. So the Gulag narratives are organized as a journey marked by stages. So these are stages, and in Russian they're called etap, when a prisoner is moved from one camp to another, from prison to a camp. So each stage is a new educational experience, a station of inner journey, a separate landscape of the mind. In addition to these etaps, stages, there are meetings of new person, including prison guards, and at each stage something happens, and one learns to distrust inmates who were on the surface similar to oneself and turn out to be informers, or discover goodness in people, in someone whom one least expected. And that's how Tamara Milutina organized her narrative. Her narrative is like a collection of stories, of mini biographies, where even parables, where she writes about people and how she, what she learned from them, or what she learned by encountering them. So, what is the choice in the prison? What is the choice which people have when there is not much choice? My answer is that there are still choices. There is a choice between physical and moral survival, between caring for oneself and caring for others, between trusting people or not, between forgiving or not, and there is a choice how to tell your story. And of course we know how the prisons and camps were organized to break people's moral integrity, to break their ability to remain an honest, an ethical person. You know, there were all kinds of methods used. And knowing these methods, we can evaluate how people decided to behave. Like Tamara, for example, she has chosen not to give the names of the members of her organization. She gave names of people who died or who were out of reach of the NKVD. She also refused to become an informer, while we know that from other narratives and from her narrative that many people agreed. And she even never mentioned that she spoke Estonian, and obviously being Russian, the people, the guards in the Irkutsk prison probably didn't expect her to speak Estonian, but she was very fluent. She grew up in Estonia, but she has chosen not to mention this so that she wouldn't be used when the NKVD interrogated Estonian people who were deported, who couldn't speak Russian. Okay, physical survival, that's really important, and if you read memoirs of Gulag, that's what you encounter most. Food was the most important thing in the life of prisoners, because that's what they lacked most. And hunger and the distribution of food was a real test to ability to survive at all costs. And there are some stories in Varlam Shalamov which you might read, and you can just realize, to what extent this human ability to remain human can be tested by a simple piece of bread or a simple kind of meal. So in Tamara memoir, we have two interesting stories which I would like to share with you to show how people how people could react on the situation of hunger. In the first story, she writes about celebration of Christmas in prison. She says, Estonian women have been singing Christmas hymns in morning, and a young, very sweet Estonian girl, Yuta, went round to everyone, congratulating each of us and handing us a tiny piece of chocolate. It was a miracle. Everyone held it on their tongue for a long time, trying not to swallow it right away. The sweet girl had the fortitude to keep a big bar of chocolate. She could have eaten it secretly with a friend, and both would have been satisfied, but she carefully divided it for everyone. So this, for us, of course, it doesn't matter much. Okay, well, what's the big deal to share a bar of chocolate? But imagine in a prison where people hadn't even had enough bread for days, and having this little chocolate was indeed a miracle, and in the spirit of Christmas, kind of to share. But in just few pages later, she describes another situation where she herself has become a proud owner of a whole loaf of bread, which she won because she was a good handicraft maker, and she made something for the prison guard. He brought out a prison guard a whole loaf of bread wrapped in clean clothes, and a miracle, another miracle. So there was, first story has the word miracle in it, and the second story. What saved me was that the bread was hard as a stone, frozen. I couldn't eat it at once. I nibbled on my miracle lying on the top banks, covered with my coat, with my head, so that no one would see me. This is how the labor camps re-educated people. So this confession is a realistic description of a person's inability always to behave morally and share one's food with others, but also of the narrator's ability to understand her own weakness and bitter comment on the impact of the camp mentality, homo homini lupus est, on otherwise good and moral people. So the book is so rich in these moments of struggle, in these moments of growth, that I cannot even start telling all this. So I choose some examples, but of course at the expense of others. There are examples of choosing to help others, to self-sacrifice, without even making any big deal out of it. She was a daughter of the doctor. She served as a nurse in the invalid camp, and she did these things, did her looking after the sick as just a normal duty, not anything special. But there is one thing I wanted to pay attention to is dignity. How much time I have? Kui palju aega? Thank you. So, dignity. This is a very important point, and many authors from, especially the Holocaust survivors, they reflect on this idea of dignity. Bettelheim writes, dignity defines man's internal ability to regulate his own life. So, as we learned yesterday from Maria Pukac's lecture, this ability to regulate one's behavior, one's life, is a sign of a mature person. So, what Bettelheim speaks about, is exactly this kind of sign of maturity, dignity. So, dignity is really something that a naked man who has been deprived of everything can retain in the camp. And we have many examples of this. But there is a really interesting story in Milutina's memoir about a moment when she was assaulted by another unknown man, in front of others. She was assaulted as a woman. And later, she discovers that he's a doctor, so he's her boss, and she's a nurse. How could she respond to such an offense? So there is a power dynamic, she's a woman, he's a man, she's a nurse, he's a doctor. And she still found a way to confront him. She asked him which article of the penal code he was sentenced under. And the question cut him really deeply, as he was sentenced for theft, not for a political crime. "I'm a thief," he explained. And in that moment, she realized the depth of his pain and humiliation. And later, she witnessed him being... He didn't see that she was a witness, so she just kind of came to be a witness of a situation when he was assaulted by another worker who called him Yid, a Jew. And this context allowed her to re-evaluate her own attitude and to forgive him. And they eventually became friends. So in moments of extreme dehumanization in the camp, dignity, of course, was often the only thing left. As one of the survivors writes, "It became our home, our pride, our only possession and moral strength to defend." But in Tamara's narrative, dignity doesn't have an absolute value. And in this story about Dr. Berlis, it is questioned, like her dignity was assaulted, but she realized that he was assaulted too. He was humiliated too by being sentenced as a thief, by being called a Yid, and she has changed her own attitude. And I think this story, she doesn't even explain it, so you have to read it between lines, why she tells us this story and how she tells us. Maturing of the Gulag prisoners continued even after their release. When they returned from the camp, they regarded that their experience was unique, but soon they learned that it was not. I came back from the camps very prickly, she wrote in she wrote it of course later, but when she returned from the first camp, she considered that, "It seemed to me that my soul was covered in abrasions. I thought that the only real people were those who have been behind the barbed wire, experienced the loss of loved ones, arrest, investigation, prison, hunger, forced labor, disenfranchisement. During difficult 5 years of my life, I imagined how I would talk about all this. I told in my mind to an imaginary listener. This is how all the events were so firmly imprinted. That's why all the events were imprinted in my memory." But then she says, "Very soon I realized that everyone was a storyteller, and with much more right." So people who were in Estonia while she was in the camp, they had also suffered. They also had all kinds of hardships and losses they came through, so that she just quickly realized that she has no monopoly on, suffered the most, monopoly on being the one who will tell people the stories. There was no one who had not suffered loss, who hadn't been in difficult circumstances. Fortunately, I realized this soon enough, and to my great advantage, turned from storyteller to a listener. And that's what Philip Mamalakis was talking about yesterday, about the value of listening and, sacrament of listening, making space for the other, not kind of to push on people your story, even if you have a great story to tell about your suffering. But still, we know that Tamara was a great storyteller, and she continued to speak. So I'm going to say just a few words about how to tell the story. So the choice of a prisoner and the choice of the survivor is how to tell a story, and it's our choice too. And her choice was not to condemn the system, because others have done it already, but to remember moments of love, friendship, and mutual support. It was also her choice not to make her the central actor of her narrative, but become an instrument through which to tell the story of other people. And in one of her stories, actually the book is really, it's got many funny and comic moments, and there is one moment where there was a very beautiful woman who couldn't speak well Russian, and so Tamara served as her voice. So she became a Cyrano de Bergerac for this beautiful woman, and she wrote letters for this lady, and that's how she tells her stories in the book. So she becomes a voice for people who cannot tell their stories because they died, because they have not had chance to write about the experience. Right. So then there is another moment which I want to mention is time gap. So we talk about maturity as happening through time. Okay, you can ask me, if she published her memoirs already when she was an old woman, it was in the 90s, she was 80 years old. Okay, she was working on it and wrote and told people the stories, but still there was this time gap. We can say maybe she has matured during this time. Maybe she decided to tell her story in such a way because she was such a mature person. But I am very fortunate to read her letters written during the camp, and these letters tell us something about her as a person at the time of her being not imprisoned, but being deported and to Siberia second time. And this is one of the letters she wrote to her mother while on the way to her special settlement. And you can see that it is colored with these different colors, and I want you to tell me what do these colors mean. Well, in that you have to read in English. I can read aloud. My dear mommy, well, I am a Siberian now. I don't even know where to start. As I thought, I was taken farthest away from everyone. Our group was the last. From Krasnoyarsk, 330 kilometers north along the Yenisei, 300 kilometers east along the Angara to the village Boguchany, etc. Yeah, I have 3 minutes, but our things were on the boat. The boat was pulled by a rope, absolutely archaic, and the taiga without end and edge, untouched by man's hand, covered with dead giants, meaning the trees, covering the sky with peaks. Physically it was tough and everyone was weak. Legs were sprawling in the swamp, stumbling over bands. And I just read one example. But my God, the forest was so beautiful, with dark pines and firs and golden birches. All the time there were hills, but even on them there was swamp. The darkness stopped us, we went deep into the depths, etc. So this is a continuation. So she writes about her arrival, how she settled in the barrack, and then she describes the barrack. It was clean, everything scrubbed clean, and there was a huge red and yellow bouquet. It was very cozy. Then she speaks about work, how they will work in the forest. My mood is very good, everything interests me. She speaks about robbery. She was robbed, and she says, lightened up on the way, but I'm in a good mood. And then she speaks about strange thing happening to her on the way, that somebody fell in love with her, despite her having gray hair. Well, yeah, just tell me, what are these colors? Okay, what is blue? That's easy. Miss on синина. Difficulties, thank you. And red? Huh? Yeah, something to enjoy, right? And green? Huh? Yeah, but also any other suggestions? Okay, she says, we were traveling all the time on the roof of the barge. The rain never stopped. But this man who she met, he kind of covered her with his coat so that she would not be wet while he was, of course, getting wet. And there was also things which she mentioned there, like about men who were looking after these women who were with them, going through this taiga, piled soft, fragrant fur for us, covered us with. I'm sorry, it's all in. Care, thank you, care or little acts of kindness. Yes, so we have in one letter, in one sentence, two of these things. We have a kind of a realistic description of hardship. She was walking 55 kilometers on foot. There was rain non-stop. They had to sleep in the forest. They came to a barrack. She comes from a kind of middle-class kind of family in Tartu with her mother as a doctor. Okay, that's her second settlement. The first one probably was more shocking. And of course, she writes to her mother. We know that when we write to our parents, we try not to kind of make them worry. So we want them to feel that, well, it's not so bad. So it is a little bit like this Italian film about concentration camp where the father tries to kind of, Anyway, but what I want to say is that in this moment, we see that it is Tamara's attitude to life. And it is also what Francesca told, a meeting with reality. And for her, reality is not just being a prisoner in a camp facing injustice. For her, reality is also this incredible beauty of the nature and kindness of people, and something that she can. It's life, basically. In the whole letter, it's the whole life, because life is about this. We do see suffering, but we have, and I'm moving to the end. So, in the end, I have just one quotation from Viktor Frankl, where he speaks about the meaning of life. And there are three different ways in which one can discover the meaning of life. One, by creating a work or doing a deed. Two, by experiencing something or encountering someone. And three, by the attitude we take toward unavoidable suffering. And of course, he, as a survivor of a camp, he knew what it means. And he knew what it meant for people who didn't survive, who were with him. And what he wrote was honest, but it wasn't desperate. So what he says, there are situations in which one is cut off from the opportunity to do one's work or to enjoy one's life. So number one or number two are not available. But what never can be ruled out is the unavoidability of suffering. In accepting this challenge to suffer bravely, life has a meaning up to the last moment, and it retains this meaning literally to the end. In other words, life's meaning is an unconditional one. For it even includes the potential meaning of unavoidable suffering. But still, in Tamara's memoir, what we see a paradox is a paradox where one can suffer, but still turn attention to moments of friendship, love, forgiveness, and even poetry. And in my paper, I don't have any quotation from the gospel. And in Tamara's memoir, even though she was Christian and wife of the leader of Christian organization, we also don't see many references to the gospel or religious work. But the gospel was written by the invisible ink between the lines. And that will be my last point. Thank you.